Hello, I'm Howie Sheriff, and this week I'm in the host seat, welcoming you to another show from You Call This Yoga Internet TV. We're here to discuss accessible yoga and the many forms that we can practice, the limbs of yoga to achieve the benefits of a yoga practice, moving towards greater awareness of ourselves, others, and the world. We like to bring guests onto the show each week and learn about their path to bringing yoga in an accessible way to their communities and beyond. That's the beauty of Internet TV. It's an interesting process in trying to recruit guests for the show and then ultimately fulfilling that intention live right now. Today, we have one of those intentions that have not turned into reality, as we've been promoting Rolf Gates for weeks and thought that we were going to be interviewing him in a few minutes. At this point, we're not in touch with Rolf, and if anyone has contact with Rolf, if you could check in with him or marry him. We're concerned and hope they're okay. I've done some research about Rolf, though I'm sure many of you have read his books. He's also working on a new book right now, and who's to say that he's not working on it literally right now? But I have with me my copy, or at least my wife's copy, of Meditations from the Mat. And this book has been very instrumental in my yoga teacher training. Not just the book itself, but the actual content of the book and Rolf's perspectives as he's been learning. And this is from 15 years ago. The book is from 2002. So we're just going to shift our process because we also created a 1-hour open format for Rolf. Therefore, I now have, if you'll allow me, an open hour of format on some of these concepts that I believe I can share with you, and also your invitation to call in at 919-518-9773, where we could talk about the Four Noble Truths, some of the aspects of Rolf Gates' writings that you've experienced and learned from, and concepts of how we can bring our practices to the world in an accessible way. That's 919-518-9773. Also, we have a Skype connection, Computers 2K Voice, Computers 2K Voice, or you could log in the chat box at the Nissan Communications page that you're likely to be on now. You Call This Yoga, the nonprofit organization that produces this show, just had a board meeting just the other day. And we're focusing on how we can streamline and focus our programs to the physically challenged and underserved. This year, we've been focusing on youth yoga, yoga for physically challenged, military, and veterans. In my studies about Rolf and Miriam Gates and their entities, I've noticed that Miriam was also involved with a youth entity. Rolf had served as what I believe is an Army Ranger. I saw Rangers, and I suspected it was Army. And he's been sharing his yoga and the elements of yoga principles for over 15 years. In my studies also, he has been dealing with people who have had addictions, helping to form support networks throughout his region and country and world with Nikki Myers. So we welcome your input on yoga for recovery and how this may have had some impact in dealing with Rolf, Nikki, or Y12SR. Shifting the concept to accessible yoga and studying about Rolf, I was able to do a little bit of research about the Four Noble Truths. Though this is not an area of my strength, I'd like to just share these with you and welcome your input about them. In essence, one of the truths is that there is suffering throughout and tension. And what I found interesting in listening to a podcast from Rolf was that suffering can be very subtle, even just the presence of tension, any sense of resistance. And that's fascinating too, because he said, just as we might wait our turn to speak, or in this case, waiting my turn to have a guest, that there's a bit of tension that arises and that it's important to just notice that there's tension. So in your daily life, it's encouraged to be open to the vision or sensation that there is tension around us and some degree of suffering, and how to even turn that inward and to notice, how am I suffering? So I'll invite your thoughts and comments and perspectives on what are ways that we might be suffering and don't even notice, and how can we stay alert to this versus the idea of just keeping our head down and moving forward, or at least think that we're moving forward. I know for a long time I was suffering with pain, limitations in movement, which caused me to be suffering, but in denial. And though I was practicing yoga and trying to be mindful, I was still not being truthful of my suffering. And therefore, I got to share that suffering with anyone and everyone around me, despite my denial. So I'll invite your perspectives on how you're living your life, and if you have ways of noticing and then sharing that. 919-518-9773. Computers 2K voice on Skype. Another principle of the Four Noble Truths, once we've become aware of the presence of suffering, is to look at the cause of it. Not necessarily to become so rooted and blaming of a cause, but the idea that there is some cause. It may be external or it may be internal. And noticing when this cause can be present. It could be an individual, it could be a situation. And that's something that we could look at. What is causing our suffering? And once, hold on, my phone's ringing. Good morning. Hi. Oh, it is live. The question was, is this taped or live? It is live. So if you can just hold on for a little while longer, that was Rolf. And must have been part of the eclipse yesterday. I know we were in the path, or at least 93% of the path. And that could have disrupted our communications. But be it as it may, we're still back on track to have Rolf on in just a couple of minutes, so stay tuned with that. I'll touch base on the third noble truth that I've come to appreciate in reading about Rolf and teachings of he and the Buddha, not necessarily in that order, and that letting go is an essential part of healing and managing suffering. I can appreciate that things that I believe are helpful or at least neutral may not really be, and I become very attached to them. And when I think that I have a solution, it's very easy to become entrenched in that. Could it be also some of our daily practices that we're so entrenched in that maybe we've had the good fortune of something working out, but really we might be suffering in that attachment? So I'll invite you to look at the attachment that you have to anything, and we welcome your input on that. Hopefully, at this point, you're very attached to our show with very little suffering involved, other than occasional off color or offbeat joke. Speaking of which, we're up to the fourth noble truth, which is how is your practice? And the practice is some of your daily rituals and freedoms that you may allow yourself to explore, to experience, and to notice just what's going on around you. This is some of the path towards enlightenment. And it could be as simple as just how do you approach the day when you start? What are your routines in the morning to prepare yourself and how you engage with others? As well as even your yoga practice. And is it something that you're working at, or is it something that is happening and you're noticing and being with it? Ah, I have my phone on silence. Hello again. So at this point, we've been able to touch base on the four noble truths, and we'll essentially have a little do over of the start of the show as we can eventually finish our connection with Rolf and have him on. In reviewing Rolf's bio and website, he's had a pretty broad swath of experiences. He's also had to deal with loss and suffering, which has ultimately impacted him tremendously, as anyone could be. I found that very fascinating as a young adult, some of the things he's had to manage. He's a bit older now, and he has a lot of perspective and encounters with many people who have dealt with suffering. So we're looking at that, but we're also looking at what his current focuses are. And that has to do with a book that he's writing, the teaching, mentoring, community outreach that he's doing with helping to manage addiction, as well as teacher development. Uh-oh, another call. Hello again. I have Rolf. And then, all right. Well, I've lost my phone, so I've lost another reference. But I can appreciate that in this Meditations from the Mat, which is available online, that I found that when I was a yoga teacher apprentice, that this helped me to create some themes for my teaching. And I like to think of how, in an accessible practice, that myself or you or teachers out there can develop a theme that involves compassion, an attachment to what might have been expected, and then can it be something that you can let happen and observe without judging? Many of us with physical limitations feel that, oh, we can only do so much. However, I'd like to encourage the idea that we're not attached to our limitation, but the potential of what we can achieve within that experience. For example, my arms go up at different angles, and that's fine. I don't expect to be perfectly neutral. However, what can I achieve within that, in that awareness of this disparity? Can I appreciate that one reaches differently than the other, and that as I maneuver and explore those edges, can I explore different truths and experiences in my practice? So I'll invite you to explore, where are your edges, and can we invite some exploration and noticing of what it is? Speaking of noticing what is, I notice a sharp dressed man on the other side of the camera. So soon we'll have our guest, Rolf. So we're making video contact. The other thing that I'd like you to consider in the meantime, in the realms of attachments, is it doesn't mean that we have to shed them so immediately, but it's important to just notice them. For a long time, I felt that I could keep playing and sports and doing what I was doing because I was so attached to being part of a team. However, I didn't realize that I was also affecting some of the morale on the team. Eventually, when I chose to retire from sports, I was able to, after some time, figure out that there are other teams out there, and it doesn't have to be this one team that was dividing my energies. So I'll invite you to look at, is there a way that we can address some of our attachments and find ways to negotiate letting go of them with some other practices? So let me ask the production team here, how are we with transitioning?
Rolf,
Yes.
you need to turn that off. Whatever
To turn it over? Turn what over?
whatever off. Shut the blinds behind you. Turn off the lights behind you because it's creating a shadow on your face.
Okay, let me
Illuminated from behind. Rolf is illuminated
All right.
from the West Coast. So the sun is out there and the sun is out here. Rolf also has developed a mentorship program. I found that very fascinating too, because some of the men's groups that I've read about felt that it's important not only to be a mentor, but to have a mentor. This is pretty helpful in learning as a yoga teacher and being out there in the world, that there's not a lot of folks to engage with about some of the issues of practice, the public, and how to develop as a teacher and a person. So we appreciate that Rolf has been creating this mentorship program that I'd love to hear more about too. So eventually we'll have Rolf on. Hey, there's a smile.
Hey, yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Okay. I hope that I've honorably shared some of the concepts that you propose, and that people will get back to us. It's thrilling to have you here. I was talking about mentorship as a segue in because I was reading about your mentorship program. Can you share a little bit about who your mentors have been over the years?
Oh, my own mentors. Okay, well, yeah, I think that's been a huge part. I think there's a story that I'm going to mess up about the Buddha being asked about spiritual friendship and its role in spiritual practice, and basically him saying it's all of it. You know, it's one of these stories that like everyone knows, and I'm and I and right now this moment I can't capture the fullness of it, but essentially he's asked, what role does spiritual friendship play, and he says, it's the whole thing, and so every spiritual community I've been a part of has had like sponsorship and 12-step programs, has in the yoga world, in the Buddhist world, you have teachers, but specifically I guess I had a bunch of kind of anonymous folks in the 12-step world who, were, incredibly important. There's a gentleman named Henry who I met in 1990, and he had been born prematurely because of his mother's heroin addiction. And when I met him, I was a military officer, and he was a kind of a low-ranking military guy with not a lot of kind of mental assets as you'd understand them at like Harvard. But he had a tremendous kindness and tremendous wisdom, and he took me under his wing. He took me into his family. Like, I would spend weekends at his house with his kids and stuff, and he basically took care of me for the first 6 months of my sobriety. And so from there, it's just the next person was a person named Forrest, who had been homeless as a child, and got sober at 18. And when I met him, he was 25. So he had like 7 years, and that was like really impressive. And he was just what he did is he ended up graduating from Harvard. He was a cook. As a homeless teenager, he didn't have any like academics, and so he had to like go to like get his GED, and then he went to Harvard night school. But he did so well that he was offered a position in one of the houses of Harvard, in North House in Harvard, as the kind of every kind of dorm at Harvard has like a visiting professor who's a super important person. Like, so in North House at the time, it was like a German physicist who's like one of the best in the world. And this guy would put on dinners to like the other visiting elites, and Forrest would make their like little hot dogs, and because he would do this, he got to live in the dorm. And he had so endeared himself to that community, they actually gave him a degree from Harvard when it came time to graduate.
Uh-huh.
And so he was my second mentor. And so one of the things Forrest taught me was that when you don't know what to do the loving thing. And he was 25 years old when he taught me that. When you don't know what to do the loving thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've definitely had people be there for me. I mean, it's a blessing, that you and I could probably spend the rest of the hour talking about, of just the mystery of the people who get put into your lives, and the impact they have on us, and how critical it is that we have people who believe in us, people who know the way before we knew the way, so they can demonstrate the path. These days, I mostly I find inspiration in a lot of different venues. Like, right now I'm a huge like Penn State wrestling fan. Their coach is basically a teacher. No lie. Like, their motto is, you can't control the results, but you can control your effort. And they have this whole very spiritual approach to athleticism, and it's changing this sport in both at the collegiate level, but also they have kids in college who are on our world teams and are competing at the world level, and they're doing it from kind of a spiritual perspective. And so their whole, like, how they process, for instance, he teaches these young people to instead of calling themselves nervous, they say they're spirited. And so, like, well, I was really spirited before the match, and so he's teaching them at a very young age to not kind of settle for less in terms of how you frame a situation, and frame a situation mentally in a way that leads to success. Like, you have to have in your mind a pathway to success.
Mm-hmm.
How you think about this is going to be critical. Like, he has some of the best young athletes in the world training with him, but even they are not going to meet their match.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't have the mindset, both in how to prepare themselves and how to conduct themselves in the match, that's going to be the deciding factor. It won't be athleticism. It won't be genetics, because at that level, everyone has it. It's going to be the mental component. And so how he's training these young people is like helping me think about how to be with my own kids, you know. And so he's a mentor to me, and like how
Hmm.
to kind of talk my kids through being in middle school and high school. Um, and then the Spirit Rock community in California, I started my meditation practice at Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Mass, um, which is Joseph Goldstein and Jack Kornfield and Sharon Salzberg founded that center in the 70s based on their work with their mentor, Ajahn Chah. And then they've been my mentors, you know, for, you know, the last 15 years. And how they live their lives and how they teach their community, how they lead their community and how they teach has been, you know, that's my kind of ideal when I think about how I want to roll through the world as a human being and as a teacher. And so I have that kind of ideal, but then I have more kind of intimate connection with a person named Philip Moffat, who was a teacher there and had been a huge that kind of friend to me and kind of kept an eye on me as I kind of went through my time as an early meditator, and I now teach there. And he's kind of like it's been important to me to have someone who knows, like, so I have these ideals who I'm interacting with, and not like, you know, imaginary friends. Like they're people whose trainings I go to and who I study closely, but they're not like keeping an eye on me, you know. And then I have, and it's always been important to me to have kind of both, to have this ideal that you're aiming at, but also have someone who is kind of an elder who sees the best in you, you know,
Hmm.
who like what I was writing about Henry, you know, I'm having a new book coming out on yoga and recovery from addiction, and um, uh, I was writing about Henry and the role he had in my life. It's funny that you asked me this, you know, um, and what I said was a telling sentence in the essay, which is that when Henry saw me, he smiled, you know. And so to have that elder in your life who smiles when you show up, you know, that is what we're talking about here ultimately, you know, someone who sees you and likes what they see, you know. The validation that you get from that, the affirmation you get from that is, I think, this is why the Buddha described it as being, you know, everything. Because I think of the light. This is heart chakra stuff. You know, this is heart. It's like that smile was his heart. You know, it's great. There's other chakras, right? But like this is why I think why he says that the spiritual friendship is everything. Is that the heart chakra is central to spiritual practice, and the light of that heart from a mentor to a student, I think, is a deal breaker. If we don't
Hmm.
have, you know, we can't do this alone. We have to feel included. We have to feel welcome. You know, we have to feel at home. You know, our spiritual practice needs to be a place of sanctuary, you know, where we feel safe and we feel in the presence of the sacred. And I think that you know, Henry's smile was the sacred when I first came around.
Mm. Yes, and that could be so foundational
Yeah.
because you can carry that sensation on many levels with you perpetually. So that is delightful. And uh, tell us more then about the mentor program as you're creating it to be for other teachers. I was I was fascinated by that and how you were structuring that.
Well, you know, so I've, you know, on a personal level, I felt the necessity to kind of pass on what was given to me, and so I have a number of, you know, kind of personal. I don't know how many at this point, but it's quite a few teachers who I stay in contact with, and I include in what I do as often as possible. Like one of the ways that I mentor teachers informally is I have them assist me on retreats, you know.
Hmm.
And so I offer them opportunities to travel. I offer them opportunities to kind of see the practice differently, like watching me teach over here, watching me teach over there. Also, watching students be in different settings is a way to kind of see differently. You know, part of I think how we keep learning and growing is we get different perspectives. And so assisting a retreat is a way to be a little bit offline, you're a little bit hanging back, you're not like in the forefront, but you're fully present and you have
Hmm.
an accountability and a responsibility. And so, and that's been true. I've been leading retreats, I think, for about 15 years. And that's something that I do to mentor people is um, now in terms of the program, what happened is I do a 500-hour program that's like this, where it's individual, and I give someone like a homework assignment for the month, and it includes some reading and some writing, but also some conduct in the classroom, like some specific things that they're working on in the classroom. And then they come back to me in a month, and we have like an hour or two that we talk like this. And I've been doing that for maybe 7 years.
Mm.
Uh, uh, because it was basically asked of me that I do it at the 200-hour to 500-hour level, that I do some form of individual online work. A lot of it was initially spouses in the military. So I actually did a training for a woman who was on Guantanamo Bay, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I've done worked with people in Australia, South Africa, a dancer in Monaco, a woman how about that for a cool gig? So she was a professional dancer and was with a troupe that traveled Europe, and she lived in Monaco. She was a little sketchy with her getting her homework done, but she finished the what?
But with great flair.
Yeah, it was very kind of classy. But she eventually got it done. I mean, I was shocked that she followed through, because it was a 1-year program. It took her like 3 years to do it. But all of a sudden, there we were. It was like there was a day where she's like, "Hey, I'm here, and I'm going to get this. I've completed my work." And kudos to her. But so that intimate. So me being with an individual teacher for a year taught me a number of things. One is that I've always known that teachers work very alone. Like, I went from working in a social work venue where it was a residential treatment, where I had I guess we had 30 adults working with like 20 kids. And so it was a team, and we had therapists, and we had special ed teachers, and we were, doing detailed notes. And so I'd walk in for my shift and read the notes from, multidisciplinary observations of what's going down. And then I would then formulate my own opinion and head out and do my work. And at the end, I would do the same thing for the next shift, And then I ran a yoga studio, and you're like utterly alone, right? You're doing an enormous amount of interpersonal interaction. So you're in charge of a team, but you're also running classes. And so this is like constant choices that you're making that have basically clinical and leadership implications. You are guiding a spiritual community in the complete absence of any sort of support. You are winging it, flying solo. And that was just how it is. It's how yoga got spread through the United States. We went from 1 million people doing yoga in 2001 to 25 million in 2011. So in a 10-year period, we just took off, and created that. Now in 2017, God knows, it's bigger,
Right.
It's a huge, and it's becoming incredibly more sophisticated with each year, like offerings like you're doing here. There's just more and more communication, more and more education, but I don't think that there's the support yet for the grassroots folks. And so as I was doing the individual work with people, I realized how isolated they were, how it felt enormously rewarding for me to spend an hour or two with someone who's in like Saratoga, New York, helping people all day long, to offer her an hour and a half of my time, where I cared. I wasn't involved in her local dramas. I wasn't taking sides, with this or that. It wasn't about the style of yoga that we were like. I don't really, take sides when it comes to style. I'm not like a style person. I'm a yoga person, and so I was working with teachers from different forms of yoga, so to give her an hour and a half of undivided attention, to offer her, the fruits of my own experience, because I have not just my yoga experience, I also have my clinical social work experience, and I also have my military experience. And 8 years, the military educates and runs groups, and so like that was, I started learning from the military how to be a leader and how to be an educator at 18, and I got out at 26, and so like all of that informs how I suggest people lead their groups. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so I did that for a long time. And the other thing is that, people are doing great work. And so I would hear this teacher talk about what she was up to in her community, and this teacher, and I was like, wow, people need to know about this. The people in Dallas need to know what the people in Seattle are up to, because it's really interesting, And it's like it was a privilege that was too big for me to hold. And so, part of the mentorship program was to offer these kind of isolated individuals a place to connect. And so the way it works is, you'll have like 10, 15 people in the group, and it's a 6-month program. You'll pair up with a different teacher every month. And so you have this opportunity to kind of, I'll give you an assignment, and then they have to come back and present on the assignment.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have to collaborate for a month on a presentation, which kind of moves the curriculum forward. These presentations are part of how we learn, it's not just a presentation. But they're doing it in conjunction with a teacher from maybe, 2,000 miles away. And they're kind of getting a peek into their life, into their challenges. And I think what they discover is that 90% of what's happening in Dallas is happening in Chicago. But then that 10% is like totally novel. And they have a chance to be like, wow, I would never thought of doing it that way.
Mm-hmm. The
Um,
ahas. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and so that, I'm told that in the corporate world, there's a thing called a liquid network, where the best learning happens when you have like multidisciplinary groups sitting around a table.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so much having like the staff meeting for the engineer department,
Right.
but it's at lunch when the engineers are talking to the marketers kind of thing, that everyone's, thinking starts to happen. And so I always try to create those liquid networks in my trainings as part of how the training unfolds, and get groups of people together for a limited time to solve a problem and to make a presentation, and then they break them up and have new groups do it, and so that happens within the dynamic of the mentorship program, is that those people are the meetings of the minds, and then so they're getting the sense of support and education. I think that to be a yoga teacher, you need to continually be educating yourself, and I think that's a hard thing to pull off if you're also running a business. So they're getting as much education as I can manage. They're getting that, different perspective. Every month they're getting, so there's the individual work they do, but then there's the group work they do. So they're getting a chance to kind of see it differently from a bunch of, a bunch of different perspectives. And then there are also, I think the final thing is the isolation creates ultimately kind of a distorted sense of your situation, and a kind of, a little bit beleaguered outpost kind of thing going on. And when they hear from the other teachers the commonality of the challenge and the struggles and the opportunities and the victories, I think it they say a problem shared is a problem halved, and so to have these guys, kind of sit around the electronic campfire for, because what happens is the mentorship meetings are 2 hours long, and the first hour is just the teachers sharing. They're doing their presentations, they're kind of checking in, and so they have a chance to kind of hear from each other, hear their voices, and then the second hour is where the education happens. So that's the mentorship program.
Well, and it almost sounds as a parallel to a yoga class, in the sense that there's a diverse range of backgrounds coming in, and a teacher is the facilitator in the sense of what each individual is bringing in, which is the common quest, as well as their individual elements. And I saw, in terms of individual elements, that you also are working on this book, and that you had some different themes in the book. I think there were about 5 different themes. Could you touch on them and share how they're accessible, as it is an accessible show?
Well, absolutely. What's happened over the years, you think about how people kind of learn about yoga asana in America, is it's basically started in the gyms, right? And in the, some studios. But when I remember in Boston, for a while, the best classes were happening at HealthWorks. I think it's called HealthWorks. This is a long time ago, but it was a a women. It was a gym for women, so only women could be there, and it was well funded, and they had nice rooms, and yoga was being offered there as a another movement class. And so, as that whole scene kind of moved into the yoga studios in Boston, it became a very kind of influenced by the fitness industry. So people like dressed like they were going to movement class and acted like they were going to movement class. And yoga asana teachers said yoga got popular because it was vigorous, and in my estimation. And what happened is it became the vigorous vinyasa class to this day is, I think, probably the most heavily leaned on class. I think yin yoga is becoming very popular. It's probably the next big style. Like, I think vinyasa kind of dominated for the last 20 years, and yin yoga, which is a more kind of meditative process, is starting to kind of, I wouldn't say, but like people are generally having, like, if they're having 15 vinyasa classes on their schedule, they're having 2 or 3 yin classes, but those yin classes fill up. I was talking to a woman in Long Island yesterday, and she told me that her restorative class, was it Long Island? No, it was Oakland. In Oakland, her restorative class sells out, And so there's starting to be more of that happening in the mainstream yoga scene. Is yin yoga is, I think, the front runner of like bringing a different approach. And then meditation is slowly, I work with a woman in Cleveland, and she's had a meditation program there at her yoga studio for the last like year or so. And that's starting to fill up. Like there's a demand so what started off as just kind of a vigorous movement class is, 20 years ago, is starting to, gel a little bit. And part of how that happens is for people like myself who've had the opportunity to study for a long time, to take yoga theory and get very specific, to turn yoga theory into skills that people can learn in the settings that they're in. And they don't have to like go to some new setting and spend the new money and new time. They can take a skill and learn it in the drop-in flow class that they're used to going to, or the drop-in yin class. And so, and the person who taught me how to do this, strangely, was the Buddha, right? It was my Buddhist meditation teachers. The skills of meditation that they have taught me are the skills that I teach in yoga asana these days. And this idea of naming a skill. So the Buddha, describes the human. The Four Noble Truths are, there is suffering, primarily because we see backwards, which is the same as yoga. It says avidya is seeing, misunderstanding. So we see backwards. We think the impermanent is permanent. We think the unreliable is reliable, and we think that which is not the self is the self. And so we have kind of a perceptual confusion. And that's the first noble truth. And the second noble truth is that, and we cling to it. If you think about what happened like this, the last 2 weeks, there's been kind of a lot of clinging going on around, Confederate statues. And theoretically, it's the United States of America, and the Confederacy fought against us. So quite apart from slavery and racism, it's like, why are we clinging to statues from an army that was not the United States? It's like any other army fought on our soil, causing 600,000 American deaths. We wouldn't have statues to that army, but there's this kind of clinging to a perception. And I won't get in anyone's, head. I mean, but clearly there's a clinging to a perception. And so the second noble truth says that we make stuff up and then we cling to it, right? We take a position and we cling to it. And he says, like, we're stuck like a wheel in mud in a perspective that causes suffering. Sounds familiar? Mm-hmm. And then the third noble truth is that we can let go. We can get unstuck. And then the fourth, literally, that's the whole thing. It's like, it's abandoning it. We can completely let it go. We can let go of what we're holding on to. We can let go of our intellectual positions, which just doesn't seem like a stretch, but like, apparently it's harder than it sounds. And
oh yeah, until proven elsewise, right?
Yeah.
What's in it for me by letting go? It's not always clear.
No. So then the fourth noble truth is how you let go, right? And so the first two, he has 8 kind of skills of letting go, and the first two um, are view and intention. And I kind of describe view and intention to students. This idea of like what I just did for you was the view. You know, the view of Buddhism isn't that the problem is like global warming, or the problem is starvation. But these are terrible things, but it's not the problem. The problem and the cause of human suffering in Buddhism is that we make stuff up and we cling to it. And then there's a chaos there. I mean, imagine someone just making up a reality and then defending it. That would create chaos. That you maybe seen examples of that recently. And so that's the view. Now, I'm not saying it has to be your view or my students' views, but for me, it's an example of a view. Bill Wilson had a view which founded 12-step programs, which his first step was that, he was powerless over his addiction and made his life unmanageable. And his second step was that God could relieve him of this situation. So that was the view, that he was powerless, but God could help him. And his intention was the third step. He turned his will and his life over to the care of the God that could help him. And so, intention follows view. First, you have an understanding of the problem, and then you have an intention to get well. And so I talk to students about, for instance, one of the easiest ways to understand view and intention is this idea of there's what we're letting go of, and there's what we're embracing, right?
Yes.
There's what we're letting go of and what we're embracing, and the intention is to find harmony thusly, like the way that the intention behind this renunciation and this practice is harmony. It's not success or victory, but the intention is harmony. And so that's the benchmark. That's what we're like. If I eat this way or talk this way or work this way, does it create harmony in my life or disharmony? And the quality of the intention is critical to the inquiry. Like in science, they say if you ask the wrong questions, you get the wrong answers, right? And so I describe and view and intention to people, and how, like, first you have to have an accurate view. You have to be asking the right questions, but then the intention also has to be. And for me, it's been, for some time, I wanted to succeed on my path. And so with that intention, I still had a very kind of dualistic worldview. Whereas this idea of the intention of harmony, that like my practices wouldn't net out to, like, for instance, I'm not going to succeed against the aging process, right? But I will find harmony within the aging process. And so that intention is critical. And so I describe those two skills, but I don't try to teach them, because they feel a little, they're like really the student's work. It's for the student to recognize the view in their own estimation, and to recognize an appropriate intention. What I teach people is what to do next, assuming that you have an accurate view of your situation, assuming you have a meritorious intention, right?
Yeah, accurate.
Right. Assuming that's all in place. No, and this is what you said at the beginning. This is what our mentors do for us. It's much easier to see if something is working for somebody else than if it's working for you. And so I could look at Henry or Jack Kornfield and be like, okay, these guys have a way of life that adds up. I can see this without attachment. I don't have to defend anything. I don't have to prove anything. I can just observe someone else and be like, wow, what they're doing, it freaks yoga people out. But I started CrossFit about 3 years ago because I had a student come in who was the fourth person. I live in Santa Cruz, and it's where CrossFit was invented. And so the CrossFit in Santa Cruz is very different than like what's being rolled out around the world, because it's just different,
Of course.
And so like the kind of like people training in CrossFit gyms are working with people who, so I won't get all into that, but it's very different. And so when you say CrossFit, it means a lot of different things, different people. But I had Greg Amundsen take my turmeric hour, he was, I guess the guy's name is Glassman, who started CrossFit. He was his fourth student. And looking at him, I got the view. I'm like, okay, well, this is clearly working for this guy. I'll tell you the moment when Greg sold CrossFit to me. I had observed that he was highly adept physically, but about 2/3 of the way through the training, we had to do some time management stuff, and I told them that they had to have lunch in the studio with me, like bring a bag of lunch on Sunday, right? Now, Greg had his gym literally like 4 storefronts over, and it was Sunday afternoon, and they were having a barbecue, which they're all very, meat-eating paleo guys. So they were having a bonding thing at his CrossFit gym with literally there's smoke rising up of a barbecue and a gathering of CrossFit people who were having their Sunday. And this is Greg's thing. And so I walked past the barbecue and I walk into my yoga studio, and this half hour they were given was their own time. I just said, I want you guys with your own time, I want you to eat here and chat with each other. And so that when I show up, we can get busy, right? And I had no expectation that Greg wouldn't be at his business at his barbecue. I walk into the studio and there's Greg on the floor. Now, Greg, as you can imagine, is this hulking dude, right? And there's hulking Greg with his bag lunch in the circle. To me, this is true leadership. Like, if you can be a student and you understand the dedication of that Greg was like, yeah, I have made a commitment here. And I'm going to do 100% of what I was committed to include sitting in the circle with my bag lunch. And, these people can have their barbecue, but I got something to do. I've said I would do something. That kind of follow through. I was like, okay, this guy, not only is he demonstrating that his methodology has some merit, there's a character there,
right,
that I completely recognize. And so it's easier to see the value of someone's practice than it is to see the value of your own. You can observe someone on a path and be like, okay, that's a good path. And I think the older you get, the more that you, I remember being sold on a meditation teacher because he was asked a question about a different tradition. He was a Thai forest tradition Buddhist. And he was asked about Zen. And he just said, well, I don't know about that. And I'm like, that's a good teacher.
right, because I don't know. Right. What's you cite that you don't know? That's the first lesson.
Right. I don't know. I don't know about this tradition. I've spent my life in that tradition. So who am I to talk about that tradition? Right. And I'm like, there you go. And you start to, as you get older, you start to see that. And so, so view and intention is not something that I put on somebody else. They have to decide for themselves the view and intention. What I tell them is the skills that I teach are wise effort, wise concentration, wise mindfulness. And those are the 3 kind of skills of meditation that the Buddha taught next. So he had view and intention, then he had effort, concentration, mindfulness. And so I teach those skills because they're incredibly relevant to how to be in a yoga asana. There's the way to think of effort is it's connection. If we're going too soft or too hard, we're not in full intimacy with our experience. Wise effort we connect to what's happening through wise effort. Concentration is where you look directly at what's happening, and mindfulness is where you understand. And so there's this process of connection, of looking deeply into, and then coming to understand. And so, and what the way I describe mindfulness is just a simple, what is it like? You're asking yourself, okay, so I come into wise effort and I can now hear the birds. In concentration, I look deeply at the sound, and how birds sound like water. And I'm listening to the sound of the birds. I'm also listening to the impermanence of it, how it comes and goes and comes and goes, and there's silences and there's sounds and there's change, and how it's just, it's bird sounds are almost a demonstration of impermanence, and so I'm listening, so I connect, I look directly at, and then through mindfulness, I open the door to understanding. I'm like, well, what is it like? And mindfulness isn't like, I got this.
Right.
Mindfulness to me is opening the door. You know, I have the willingness to know. And so first I have to kind of show up, concentration and effort. You know, I connect, I look directly at. But when I'm like connecting and looking directly at, there's still a big self there doing something, right? With his past and his story and his assumptions. And when I say, what is it like? I drop that and I become open to knowing something new. And so mindfulness to me is more like becoming open to knowing. How do I become open, really open to knowing something that I didn't know before? And so that we kind of like drop something. You know, first we have to be present for it, and then we have to, you know. So the example I use is I'm talking to someone. My son is tugging on my pants, like, "Daddy, daddy, daddy." And so in my mind, I think I know what's happening, which is he's being annoying, right? And that the best thing to do is to continue to have my conversation and to ignore him or tell him to be quiet. And then eventually he keeps doing it. So I stop and I connect. You know, I kind of relax out of the conversation. I connect to my son and I look directly at him, but I'm still thinking I know. There's a moment where I soften more and say, "Honey, what do you need?" She's like, "I have to go to the bathroom." "Oh, okay. Well, go to the bathroom." Right? It's like there was suffering and there was discord until I was willing to kind of like give myself entirely to a situation and to let go of what I thought I knew, to let go of what I was clinging to. I have to drop that. I have to like open the hand to receive. And so the mindfulness piece is the opening of the hand. And so I teach the skill of connection, of looking directly at, and of understanding. You know, I think that yoga, asana, and pranayama and meditation are like perfect venues for that. There's a lot happening in our bodies, you know, and so we can, you know, there's constant sensations and sounds, and the mind is moving and the emotions are moving. And so there's plenty to like observe, you know, and learn from.
Oh gosh, yes. Hmm.
And so I'm all about like the embodied practices of asana, pranayama, meditation. I love being a teacher in that realm, you know. And then the final thing that he taught was wise speech, action, and livelihood. And instead of getting into that, I get into the heart quality behind it. So an example of how I teach is I have people move smoothly, right? And moving smoothly is when you move smooth, you are in wise effort and wise concentration. You're not necessarily in mindfulness, but you're getting close to it. You know, there's this kind of letting go that's required to look directly at something and to harmonize effort and ease. And so I have them move smoothly, and they'll do that for a while. And then I have them move smoothly, but also if they can find smooth, they've learned something they're not aware that they've learned yet, which is to move with an intention.
Hmm.
And I have them move kind. And so I teach wise speech, action, effort by teaching the Brahma Viharas, you know, which is the heart qualities. So that's kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And so I have them start to bring kindness into their movements, you know, into their regard, you know. So it's like when you know, slow the breath down enough that you can feel it. Now feel it with kindness, and have there be a gentleness in how you're bringing your awareness to something. And so there's the skills of kind of bringing awareness, you know, and then there's the skills of the heart. And those are when you said the 5 skills, I teach effort, concentration, and mindfulness. And so that's moving smoothly. And then I teach kindness and compassion. I like to get the joy and equanimity if I have time. But if someone can just be smooth and kind, they've gone a long way. You know, if that becomes like, no matter what style they're practicing, no matter what else they're up to, if they're moving smooth and kind, you know, there's that idea of you can't demand insight or freedom, but you can create the conditions that are auspicious, right?
Hmm.
That to arrive, right? And it's like you're a gardener. You can't tell a flower when to grow, but you can kind of create the conditions.
Hmm.
And, to me, smooth and kind are like optimal conditions for the rest of the path to happen. And so that's, I focus. So those are the skills. If you think of full circle, now you have people showing up to a movement class. but they're being taught to move with smoothly and kindly. And they're being taught how to create the conditions like a gardener for kind of optimal growth.
Excellent. Well,
Yeah.
it's a lesson that is ever present throughout the day. And for our viewers and listeners, when we talk about accessible yoga, it doesn't mean that you're having to go to a class to live in a world where you can potentially maneuver with smoothness and kindness, or smoothly and kindly, however we say those words, that it's about connecting, being aware, understanding some of the stories that we may be making up, and that someone else's perspective can be very valid because we have our intentions and they're not always clear to us what they are. We can appreciate that we have a thought coming into something, but we don't necessarily have it all down from the get go, which is why we seek to have mentors who can appreciate us and also teachers who can help guide us. So we hope that viewers and listeners that you'll consider reaching out to Rolf at rolfgates.com, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Wonderful. Because I've reviewed his programs. There's some great speech about, or at least a talk that he had at Kripalu about lunging forward, stepping forward into your medicine. I thought that was fascinating. And that's another hour of perspectives and insight. He also had a 6-minute video or talk that I thought really captured 3 of the 4 truths from Buddha. And that if you can consider giving us our feedback about the show and how these concepts can be accessible for you, we appreciate your tolerance of our special total eclipse path consequences and the solar flares that disrupted our Skype or whatever else it disrupted. We have Rolf is going to share just a little bit more about upcoming events because he's chock full of them. So just give us a couple minutes for that, Rolf. And that next week we do have Stephen Badian, who will be discussing other meditative practices to help you facilitate accessible yoga wherever you are. You can visit this show on the Nissan Communications channel on demand in about an hour and share that. And we also welcome your feedback. The show is hosted by You Call This Yoga, and we look forward to connecting with you next week. But let's come back to Rolf before we sign off. And Rolf, what other thoughts and perspectives can we share with our teachers and aspiring yogis?
So do you this is when you want me to talk about what other offerings I have?
Sure, whatever you'd like to share in perspective or action.
Well, I'll say then I'll take an opportunity. I'll do 2 things. One is I'll give you what I'm up to, what makes me happy these days as a teacher, and then I'll tell you like what I'm doing this year in terms of my programs.
Lovely.
So I'm writing a book, and this idea of aiming your practice towards harmony is something I'm very excited about. I'm kind of like I'm researching, and for some reason that difference between, like, what I would encourage teachers to look at is the difference between the intention to succeed or to experience success and harmony. I think that potentially the intention of harmony as a kind of a benchmark of is this working or not isn't really embraced in our culture, because it sounds like you're not, like, we're all about progress, and harmony sounds like, well, I'm just going to accept the way things are. And I would encourage you to kind of put that aside. I think human beings act on their own behalf, kind of as they see it. So someone who's a street addict is seeking out their substance, thinking they're acting on their own behalf. You can't kind of take that away from a human being. So there will be social justice on the path to harmony. Does that make sense? I think people are, I'll go for harmony, and so I'll people please my parents, and I won't, and it's like, I would encourage teachers to look at harmony as a very practical measure for how they should be rolling. Am I rolling in a way that creates discord in my community, or am I rolling in a way that creates harmony? and to see that as a very high standard for behavior, a very high standard for practice. Like if the quality of my effort in a pose, the quality of my intention in my meditation, like, is that creating a harmonious experience right now, or is it creating, discord? That piece right there is looking at what you're aiming your practice towards is something that is coming out of my book these days, and so I offer that to teachers. I think it's a pretty challenging measure, as I take this on, creating harmony. Another thing that's coming out of my research is this idea that truthfulness is actually so we think of satya, right, or wise speech as being about the words that we speak, being truthful and kind of and being true to our word, right? Both being truthful and true to our word. What's coming up as I study the concept is the idea that satya, our truthfulness, really is a reflection of our relationship to the concept of the truth. That as a yoga teacher or as a yogi, you're getting still in an effort to understand yourself, but you're also understanding the truth of who you are, the truth of where we are and what this all is. And so there's this existential relationship to the truth, and literally the kind of the qualities, the character of our relationship to the truth will be reflected in our speech. Mm-hmm. And so to kind of, instead of putting the focus on the speech, to put the focus on how are you doing with the truth? Mm-hmm. Have you even thought about that? And so that would be another shift that's coming out of my work, my research for my book is one, aiming my practice at harmony, and two, looking at, and I would say that's probably got me true of all the yamas, that the behavior is a reflection of our our actual relationship to the concept, whether it's sexuality or money or truth or generosity, right? It's like our behavior will reflect that primal relationship, and to put the focus on the primal relationship. That's new for me. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I'm not ready to kind of teach that to someone else, but I'm certainly willing to look at that myself. In terms of what I do, I try to, I spend a lot of time on the road just doing workshops where I teach the 5 skills, effort, concentration, mindfulness, kindness, and compassion through asana mostly. And so I'll be in I'm all over the country. But then I like to work collaboratively. So I teach at Spirit Rock once or twice a year, which is team teaching on a meditation yoga format. I'm on a team that does the Yoga and Recovery Conference twice a year. We're at Esalen in the fall. So Esalen is back. They've had some issues with the landslides, but they're up and running, I think, in 2 days. And we're filling up our Yoga and Recovery Conference in October. So people are coming. So that's been going on for the last 8 years. And so the fall is in Esalen and the spring is at Kripalu. And so I do that. It's a 5-day retreat for people in recovery. It's eclectic. We bring different approaches, eating disorder, different styles of yoga, different forms of addiction. So we have a lot of folks who are family members, a lot of folks who are, they have other forms of addiction besides, drugs and alcohol. And so we bring professionals that can shed light on those challenges. Then I do yoga and surfing because I live in Santa Cruz, and I fell in love with surfing a while back, and so I do that every year in Costa Rica in December. And it's actually it always sells out, and it's pretty mature practice in terms of we do 3 half-hour sits a day, and those are well attended. I make that optional because I want it to be kind of a vacation feel for people. So I bring a surf instructor in the morning from Santa Cruz. He's a professional. And so there's a teacher for every 4 students in the water. And you got a 2-hour instructional period every day in 80-degree water, in 80-degree weather in December. And then I do yoga and meditation from say 4 to 7 every day in the afternoon. So you do surfing in the morning and you do yoga in the afternoon. And I do that every year. And I think there's one more thing I'm introducing. I do the mentorship program online. And then next summer, I've got Ann Cushman and Pascal Auclair, who are two kind of elite meditation teachers from Spirit Rock, will be co-teaching with me at Kripalu this next summer as a way to kind of start to bring introduce yoga people successfully to meditation. So I got a lot happening.
Quite, yes. Well, that was a mouthful of fun and experience and harmony in the path of truth. So viewers and listeners, you can engage Rolf through his website, rolfgates.com. He's got a new book coming out. You can keep posted with him on that. The Meditations from the Mat, very, very foundational in terms of life perspective. Even though it's from 2002, it is very current today. It's part of my training and sharing concepts when I was in my developmental phases of yoga teacher training. So I appreciate that from Rolf and his life experiences. So thank you, Rolf, for eventually being able to connect with us. It's still always a miracle that we're on Skype and that we can connect. I continue to learn and appreciate from you and the work that Mariam is doing also. Viewers and listeners, thanks for hanging on. Rolf, I'd like to just check in with you after the show. Stay on, please. Next week, Stephen Badian. Thank you, everyone. Namaste in your search for harmony and truth.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.